Our talk title this morning is A Change is Coming. So my one word for this title is always, because change is always occurring. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but first I'm going to qualify my position for being able to talk about this topic and say that change is not my strong suit. So as I talk about the human part of change, I invite you to know that you may have a different path. We each have to come to a place, unless you were very, very lucky and your parents taught you at an early age how to deal with change. You probably were like me, and you didn't have a real clear understanding of how to deal with change. Well, I have changed over time and found what works for me. And what works for me is to own my own reactivity, because I very often, when I'm faced with change, I very often feel hugely reactive inside. And it has been said that whatever I'm feeling shows on my face. So quite often when there is a huge change coming at me, I guess it shows on my face, and I have learned to be very quiet, but people will say to me, what's going on right now? What are you thinking? And I have learned not to answer that question, because it's usually not something really positive. It takes me time to own the reactivity, to recognize that once again I'm faced with change, which is not comfortable for me, and so to take my time and give myself the time that I personally need to go home and de-escalate and let go of the emotions and look differently upon the ideas of the way life is showing up for me right in that moment. However, I often think back to a story I have shared with at least some of you about a time when I really saw this and was able to first realize that I wanted to do it differently, and that the only one that had the power to do that was me. And it's the story about receiving an email from my principal. I was in my early years of teaching. I had owned my own business, so I thought, well, my life's my life, and I get to decide what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it. Hee hee. And I received an email that told me I would be changing grade levels at the end of the year. And so I marked myself right up and asked to see him, and he invited me in, and I sat down and I said, I don't accept this change. I'm perfectly happy where I am, and I'll stay there. And he cracked up laughing. And I kind of looked at him and I said, what's so funny? And he said, it's not optional. You're moving grade levels. And I was like, really? Well, so you're saying that I either move grade levels or I work at McDonald's? And he chuckled again. I think he thought I was truly joking. And I wasn't. I had my mind made up what I was doing and how I was doing it and where I was doing it and with who I was doing it. And when he realized I wasn't joking, he just got real solemn and he said, Deborah, I don't think that this change is all that dire. And I said, well, I'll think about it and I'll get back to you. I was owning my power, let me tell you. So I went home and I was hugely embarrassed that I had acted like that. After talking with the friends that I just knew would support my feelings, and they said, well, what do you think? He's your boss. He gets to tell you where you're going to teach. And I was like, he does? No, I had no idea somebody could tell me where I was going to teach, what grade level I would teach. I needed to teach where I was comfortable. Nope, that isn't the way it works. Well, then I was very embarrassed, so I dealt with it. And I've got to tell you, I do crack up to this day when I think about it. I crack up at his patience. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't just kick me right out of the whole school at that point. But he didn't. And I was working with a gal who ended up becoming a best friend and still is today. And it was a wonderful experience to teach that new grade level. So isn't always my strong suit. I have gotten better at it, but I'm not going to claim to be awesome at it. George Bernard Shaw says, progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. Well, that's exactly what we teach. You have to change your mind. You have to wrap your mind around new possibilities instead of being resistant to these ideas. Progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything.
Well, I love the saying that change is the only constant. And I think to look at life in a positive way with all the change going on around us is a challenge. And we all want to have our ducks in a row. We all want to buy into our OCD moments, but OCD is a disorder. And speaking of disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder is a disorder. And so that idea of having all of our ducks in a row and everything lined up and all the labels all facing towards us and everything in alphabetical order. Yes, I have OCD in some places, but I admit it. But what helps me is to remember the scientific concept of entropy. And entropy is the idea that disorder is a natural state of nature. Disorder is the natural state of nature. You notice you go out and you mow your lawn and it's all nice and perfect and straight lines and everything's exactly the same and everything's symmetrical, and within a week or so nature takes over and things are going candywampus and the flowers taking over this and the weeds are over there and you have to go back out and do it again. Disorder is the natural state of nature. A highly ordered system has low entropy, low disorder, but it's also not natural. It's not natural for things to fall specifically where they're supposed to be. Things in nature go wherever they want to be. We seem to notice moments of order because they stand out from the normal or natural flow of disorder. Moments of change give meaning to life because they tend to stand out from the monotony of disorder. The monotony and the background noises and the chitter chatter of things that go on around us, we quite often try to still and calm and to ignore, but they are always there. So I'm going to give you an example of how we try to block those things out. I'm going to give you a moment of silence. You hear the clock on the wall? Do you hear the buzz of this projector? Do you ever notice when the air conditioner comes on and off? Or that the air is blowing and we don't, and sometimes if it pops on, all of a sudden we notice it hasn't been on. Or if it pops off, you notice that it's going off. But other than that, you don't really notice the hum going on in the air. Do you ever notice the traffic out on the street? If a motorcycle or a semi-truck goes by, you suddenly notice the traffic out there, but you don't notice the cars whizzing by now and then. It seems like a quiet day today, doesn't it? But sometimes when we're here doing class or something and there's only a couple of us in the room, you hear the traffic zoom, 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 zooming out there all the time. All those things are happening all the time. They're chaos, they're background noise, they're chitter chatter, and a lot of that stuff is happening inside of our heads too. But we choose to block it out. We tune those things out because they're constant, and if we happen to think about all that stuff all the time, we would be overwhelmed with information. We tend to listen for and notice that what stands out, what are the things that are changes in the normal monotony of our surroundings, of our environment. That lends to specific meaning to life because only the important things then seem to stand out. At the end of the day, you're not going to remember how many motorcycles or semi-trucks went by out on the street, but you will remember the important things, like the things that I said. And if you find my voice monotonous, you may remember some of the things that Deborah said. When things fall into sequence or non-random order, we tend to notice them. And inside research, they set up random event generators. Now, random event generators are computer machine operated things that are binary. They only They only work on ones and twos or on and offs. And so they create random sequences constantly. And so they're constantly going 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, just random back and forth ones and twos. They found that when they placed these things all over the earth, they went back and looked at them and find out when the numbers seemed to fall into sequence. And they followed the time elements of those and found that when things seem to fall into sequence, like all ones or all twos, or 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, or something like that, or if there are more ones than twos or more twos than ones, they felt that, well, there's something weird going on, because normally a random event generator should be totally random, and so therefore there should be as many number of ones as there are twos. But if things start falling into sequence, or there are more ones than more than twos, there's something going on in the environment that has energy. And so they relate this to unified consciousness. The idea that all of the people on the earth are somehow interconnecting in consciousness. And they went back and looked at specific times when these things happened. And it was events like tsunamis, or big peace event, things happening, or marriages in royal families, or things where the whole world was watching and connected to the one idea of something was happening on the earth. And infallibly, this happened on huge occasions, almost to the second, where all of a sudden everything started falling into sequence in these random number generators, which tells us that consciousness is connected to all of us in a unified energy field. So we all share this thing, but there are moments when there are moments of change, specific moments of importance that we all connect to. And so therefore there's a unified energy field that comes about as a result of that. Now change can occur not simply on a global aspect or a universal aspect, but individually. Change can occur simply by creating a new personal perspective. Nothing has actually changed in the environment around us except the angle from which we observe it, or our point of view, how we are looking at it. That may actually be a physical aspect in terms of from what point I'm looking at it, or it can be from my state of mind, how I am seeing it differently. Now you can say, I didn't change, I just see things differently now. But if you're seeing things differently, it's probably because something within you changed by perspective. How excited are you about accepting those changes that come by? If you think you inspired the change, usually that's good. If you think something outside of you caused a change and you have to change your perspective accordingly, you may not be so happy about that. The truth is that change gives us choices. Change gives us things like curves and forks in the road, so we can make a choice and choose the path less traveled. In moments of chaos, the infinite realm of possibility is floating freely before us, and we have the opportunity to choose which possibility we want to experience. So in the moments of chaos, we can decide if we want to land in Kansas or Oz. Or from another perspective, Schrodinger's cat. For Schrodinger's cat, it's a choice of life or death. You know the story of Schrodinger's cat? It's in a box, and it's either alive or dead according to what your decision is, or it's both alive and dead at the same time. And so our choices make a difference, and sometimes choices make all the difference. Nietzsche says there will always be rocks in the road ahead of us. They will be stumbling blocks or stepping stones. It all depends on how we use them. The changes that occur around us are only relevant to us by our response to them or our reaction to them. Change is something we can celebrate with wonder. It's not something to be feared. It's an opportunity. So stop being afraid of what could go wrong and start being excited of what could possibly go right.
Because it usually does, but sometimes it takes a little while. Ernest Holmes talks a good deal about this unified consciousness that David's talking about, especially toward the end of his life after he had some experiences that made some shifts for him about the idea that he already had about a unified consciousness. But I want to switch gears a little bit from the personal, which I will come back to the universal, to that God idea. The idea that change is inevitable. Let me get this. Change is inevitable and change is constant. Yeah, there's change. And change is constant. The only thing that doesn't change is the nature of God. Now, hear that clearly, because I'm not saying that God doesn't change, because God as you and me changes a lot. And God as that in form changes a lot. But I am saying that the nature of God does not change. It can't change. It's all that is already. So while it's constantly in change, the nature of God does not change. So I have a question for you as we think about that idea that the self-givingness, the perfect love, the perfect life of God is always, always unchanging and available. We as individuals have the power to change our own life. So here's my question. Are you passionately fulfilled in your present day life situation? Are you passionately fulfilled today? And if you're not, what changes might you like to make? In my exploration this week, I found myself doing a lot of research because the stories out there are amazing. And truly, I wanted to share them all with you because they're inspiring and they're motivating. But I knew I couldn't share all of them with you that I found. So I chose one. And this story, and a lot of them, if you want to look up some more to just fill yourself up with changes that people have made, are from Reader's Digest. So they are well known and significant authors who did their own research and got names and stories. And so this story, when it was written, it's written by someone that actually lived in Crescent City, Florida. And so that I kind of liked that. And at the time that she wrote it, she was 52. And I'm going to read you her story. At 42 years old, with 2 daughters just about to finish school, I quit my 6-figure salary job working in a toxic environment and escaped to a cabin by the river. Single parenting, a horrible ex-husband, and a misogynist boss zapped my emotional well-being to near zero. In 2009, my kids now grown, I came to the conclusion that life was not meant to be so difficult. And surely there was another way. I was going to rebuild my life from scratch, even if it meant losing everything in the process. I rented a cabin in the wilderness and sat by the river for 9 months, living off my savings. I hiked, kayaked, read, and wrote, and unpacked my emotions. It was restorative. After 9 months, I found a job in the recreation industry. It was a departure from what I had been doing, but I loved it. One weekend, I hired a seaplane pilot to drop me off in the wilderness for a hiking trip. On the way, we fell in love, and I ended up moving in with him. He was a flight instructor and trained me to fly a plane. After a few failed business attempts, I started my own bath and beauty company, Walton Wood Farm, which has become a multi-million-dollar international brand in just 3 short years. If I hadn't found the courage to start from scratch, I'd probably still be stuck in that car dealership working for a tyrant today. I would not have met my darling husband, started a business, and would not have achieved my childhood dream of becoming a bush pilot. Wow, is that inspiring? Now maybe you're already living your dream. And if so, great, keep on keeping on. But you know change is going to come in one way or another, because that is inevitable. And so why not be the owner, the CEO of the changes that occur in your life? So I'd like to end today, because there were so many awesome quotes by wonderful people like Wayne Dyer, Ernest Holmes, Carl Jung, and even John Bon Jovi, that I wanted to share, but I don't want to disrupt the ideas back of this by saying their names. So I just shared some of the names. The others, I really don't know who they are. That's okay. So you might want to close your eyes and take in whatever is for you to absorb in this moment. So returning to the idea of living in joyous expectancy of good and remembering that there is only one life, I invite you to take a breath and release that breath. And open yourself up. What you are looking for, you are looking with. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Change before you have to. We cannot change anything until we accept it. He who rejects change is the architect of decay. The only human institution which rejects progress is the cemetery. Miracles happen every day. Change your perception of what a miracle is, and you will see them all around you. And in ever so much gratitude for the seeds planted toward the highest good for each individual life that is here today knowing this truth, I know that the unified connection that is ever present in this room, person to person, is a part of supporting and holding one another in the light of love and truth, as each of us continues on our path of change, our path of life. And in ever so much gratitude, I say, and so it is.